Hello and welcome to A Girl, a Guy, and a Buffy podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm Charles Swint.
Hey, and I'm your other co-host, Kate Balzer.
And thank you so much for joining us this week. We doing things a little bit differently for this episode. This is actually going to be a two-parter for you all. We have so much to say about this topic, and so we needed to break things up into two parts. So for those of you who are just joining us for the very first time, we are a spoilery podcast. We are full of spoilery goodness, and we talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer in its entirety as a whole. And what we do is we are not a rewatch podcast. We go back and we look at everything as a whole, and we look at the themes, and we pick a theme for the season, and we explore that theme for the season as our big bad theme of the season. And this season we are talking about relationships, and we've been going through the main characters of the show and talking about their relationships and asking questions about their relationships. And so today we're talking about Buffy. And like I said, because we have so much to say about Buffy's relationships, we're going to make this a two-parter.
Yeah, absolutely. And to give additional spoiler warnings, there will be mentions from things that happen on the Angel series. So typically we stick to Buffy, but because of her involvement with Angel and there's crossover episodes, there's going to also be some spoilers for Angel. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that as well.
And so our big bad question today is, does Buffy have tragic taste in men?
According to Spike, she does.
I mean, let's be honest, it's not a great track record. It's not great. But you know what? Is that her fault though? Like, I don't
I
know if
know.
that's necessarily her fault that she's not, that those relationships aren't great. I don't think, I feel like being in a relationship takes time and practice, and like you have to figure out how to be in a relationship, and you have to figure out who you are in those situations. And I think she gets to learn from each one of these relationships more and more about who she is as a person, outside of these men, because I feel like the show so often tries to define. It does this thing where it's like this whole thing about, so if you look about it like from the viewpoint of like, oh well, if I'm a woman and I want a job and a career, can a woman have it all? Like, can Buffy really have it all? Can she have the career? Can she have the relationship? Can she do all of these things? And I think it often tries to like pit those two things against each other. Like it tries to pit like her duty and calling as a slayer versus her relationship, and like can can these two things exist? And I think they keep trying to tell us that they can't, but I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think if they worked at it, they could have figured out a way to make those things work for her.
Yeah, and well, I mean, we're looking at her from age 16 to 22.
Right.
You know, that is a huge time of personal and emotional growth. Your life is changing rapidly and constantly, and figuring out, you're still developing your place in the world. You're not even
Hmm.
like close to maybe figuring it out. And, as we now know, you know, it across, more like regular people know, it's not just, people with scientific experience, that the teenage brain has not fully developed. So
Sure.
that prefrontal cortex part still developing. The decisions you make are, maybe you're not always thinking through the consequences. And I think that's very much the case, especially when poor Buffy has to think through the consequences. And she takes that burden on herself, that probably she takes it on too much, that she doesn't need to, that like everything she does is world ending, because that's how she feels the role of the Slayer.
Well,
And
and
it's something.
literally.
It is, but it's not her burden alone. But she takes that on, and nobody is there to help her correct that. Like, she's not. There's no therapy there to be like, "Hey, girl, this
Right.
you are not responsible for the world." I could say maybe like you're responsible for those big moments, because of the of your calling. but it doesn't mean every decision you make, you need to think is, how does that impact everyone else? And that actually may be part of her problem too, is she does think that way too much instead of maybe focusing on some, self-care and, her mental health first.
Right. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, for me, I think I would totally carry that burden with me and every decision that I make. If I knew if I knew that everything that I do, and early on too, it's very, Giles is very sort of not glib about it, but he does kind of instill that into her.
Mm-hmm.
Even your personal choices, Buffy, impact your duty and calling as a Slayer. And so you can't make those choices lightly because you going out on a date, because you want to go on a date, you might get some boy killed because all of a sudden there's vampires involved and this is going to happen. Like you don't, so they're always trying to put her in the situation where yes, your personal choices and your personal decisions in your private life are going to vastly impact um, you know, the greater good of the world, and you may have to end up making sacrifices. And that might be someone's life. And like, that very, very early on in season one, we get that. When she goes out with Owen, is that his name?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Like that, she has to be like, I like this guy. I really like this guy, but he's so drawn to sort of the danger of it all that me dating him could get him killed easily because he's not thinking about the consequences of what could happen. And so I have to do that for him, and so now I have to take on this mantle of being responsible for someone else's emotional and physical well-being that I never asked for, that no one else has to think about when we ask someone out on a date.
Yeah, and so my next comment, we're gonna it's gonna dive right into the angel of it all. So maybe we'll start to move into that. But I agree, but I think there's also a combo of there is that element, like there is that reality to her role. But I think at the same time, that's also a burden placed on her by Giles, by the Watchers Council, by virtue of the setup, by the powers that be, by
Hmm.
the virtue of the setup of this role. Like, why is there only one girl in the world who's responsible for all the demons?
Sure.
Like, that
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. So, like, all of her decisions should not impact, every element to slaying. But that being said, like I think a great contrast is Owen versus what happens after she sleeps with Angel. I think
Right.
her that episode with Owen, Never Kill a Boy on the First Date, is a great example of her maturity and her realizing the impact of the roles she's been placed in and what that means and how I think she even says to Giles at the end, like, Willow and Xander knew what they were getting into. So like it's a I can work with them, but like he was just in it for the thrill, like that, kind of death thrill. And she's like, I can't do that, and understands that. And I think that's like a really great mature moment. Whereas, and this gets into how we have both been speaking about the Angel Buffy relationship, that there's so much manipulation in that relationship
Hmm.
that when she sleeps with him and then he loses his soul, and then all the actions he takes as Angelus after losing his soul that she takes on personally, when really she's probably the least at fault. It was it a dumb decision to sleep with a guy who's 200 something years older than you and who was 26 when he was killed and
Right.
turned as a vampire? Yeah, but she's also 16, 17. Like, we make dumb decisions back then.
Sure.
But he's the one who didn't find out what was going on with his soul. Giles did not look out for his interest as an adult and look into like what was going on with the soul. Jenny Calendar did not speak up. Now I know she didn't understand, like she was not told that if he achieved perfect happiness, he would lose his soul. So, it's not like she knew that all along. She didn't know that until it happened either. But like there are people around Buffy who I think are more responsible for Angel becoming Angelus again than Buffy was. But I think that's the turning point for her. And all she sees is the pain and what her actions cause. And then from then on, that burden keeps weighing her down.
Yeah, agreed. And and it's funny that you said that because when you look back, it doesn't seem like I don't know if they're very clear before surprise happens. Like, I don't know if they're clear about what would happen. Like he's cursed with a soul, but what does that mean? Like, I don't remember there being anything like of them saying like a moment of one true happiness like until after the fact.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you might be right. I don't think we know that until it happens.
And
Uh,
so it's like, so again, so to your point, like they're like, oh yeah, he's cursed, but no one really knows what that means
right.
or what the consequences of that is. And quite frankly, if I'm cursed, if it's me and I'm cursed, I want to know all the ins and outs of the curse. I want to know what I can do, what I can't do, what's going to mess me up. Like, I just need to know as much as I can about this curse. And I've had like 100 years to figure it out. But instead, you're like wandering around, like, eating rats and being all sad for yourself.
Yeah, and this is where like coming up with a red herring or whatever the MacGuffin, in this case
Hmm.
it's the MacGuffin, to drive us emotional storyline becomes like sometimes you do got to think these things through. Like I get it, sometimes the MacGuffin can just be the MacGuffin and like it doesn't matter. But when you start to really think about it, why would you do a curse where the curse could be undone and like the worst vampire in history could be let loose
Right.
again?
Why
And
is
he
that the
doesn't
thing?
know that?
Why is that the thing to be like, if you
Right,
ever have a moment, and it's also very like vague about like what that means, like true
right.
happiness. Is it like if he has an orgasm, he will like lose his soul, or is it because
Yes.
he's like fully in love with a human being and like makes love to a woman and is like perfectly content in that moment? Then
Right.
that's the thing. So yeah, and it's weird. And why would you curse? Yeah, exactly. Why would you curse somebody to be like, you can't have sex with anybody. You can't fall in love because if you do, we're going to turn you into the thing that we cursed you for being in the first place.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, the thing of it is like I think so. Maybe take a step back because this will lead us into that. I think there are reasons why that specific moment did it for Angel, and it goes back to how problematic Angel is and his relationship with Buffy. So no, we're not trying to make like we have had this conversation a million times, so you hear it as we speak about the Buffy Angel relationships. But us as adults now, looking back, we very much are like that is such a problematic relationship, and it is not like this true love. It is not like her soulmate. Like that should not be thought of like the person that Buffy should end up with. I'm not saying like maybe down the road they couldn't get there, but and we're gonna delve into that, but also I don't want anyone who's like a big fan of the Buffy relationship to feel offended because I mean I certainly bought into it when I originally watched the show. This is like me growing up as an adult, also how we look at those kind of relationships changing in the last 25 years. So just kind of wanted to like put that out there.
But so I'm gonna stand on business on this. I'm gonna stand 10 toes deep on this comment because what we were talking about, and you were talking about how Angel like is so manipulative in this
Yeah.
relationship, which I agree with, and I totally think so. And I also think that we as an audience are so manipulated by this
Yes.
relationship because it's like there's nothing that happens in this relationship on screen that is like this big like moment of romance. Yeah, they go ice skating one time or whatever. And he's like, which he's very reluctant to do in the first place because he's like, I don't want to do it. And then I think Willow says something to him that makes him kind of guilts him into doing this thing where he takes Buffy ice skating and then they get attacked. And so like their entire relationship is a trauma bond relationship. It's not there's nothing like romantic about it. And so we only get this relationship through what Buffy says to other people about how she feels
Yes.
about this. So she's like, "Oh, Willow, oh, well, I spent the night with him," or "Oh, we did that." Like Willow, and she's like so like schoolgirl fawning over this older guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we get. And that's the thing that's supposed to make us go like, this is so much love. When in actuality, He does nothing,
Nothing.
absolutely nothing to be like, hey girl, hey. Like
Yes.
so
Yes.
yeah, I'm
I
so
mean,
mad
as
about it.
we talked about in our prep discussion, like when he's first on those, at least those first several episodes in season one, he's kind of a jerk. I mean, he's sarcastic, he's not really helpful, and he's like, oh, I thought you'd be taller, and you're like, how did we get to the two of them being like Romeo and Juliet?
He totally negs her like the whole
He
first like quarter
totally
of
does.
the relationship.
Oh my
He's like,
god.
oh God,
Yes. Well,
gosh.
okay. And like, let's not even start with the fact of when we learn in season three when she's losing her, and helpless losing her powers, and he talks about when he first fell in love with her. Oh, and then we also see that in the flashback
Hmm.
for oh my god, the season two finale, Becoming. And you're like, okay, first off, girlfriend is 15, just finding out she's a slayer, and like he's sitting there watching her like a creep in his car, and is like also like busted up car with his shaggy hair, and he's been living on the streets eating rats, and he falls in love with her. I was like,
He was
gross,
like,
you're
that was the moment I
200
fell in
something
love with
years
you.
old. I know. And it's like, as we learn more about Angel, you're like, oh, Angel's always been this way. This is Liam.
Yeah,
Like, he is manipulative. He goes after young women. He very much has a type. And just because he has a soul, that's not changing much in him. That's his nature, it seems to me. And so, yeah, this whole like, I understand how Buffy, when she says in Selfless that I will never love anyone the way I loved Angel. I agree because you're a teenager and your
sure.
whole world is much more narrow. And
Hmm.
as she grows up and she has new responsibilities, and then she gets Dawn, and then her mom died, like, and then she activates all the Slayers. Like, her world is changing. She can never be that focused on someone, which I think is basically part of why her relationship with Riley breaks down, because he wants that. He wants
Hmm.
what Buffy and Angel had. And she's like, dude, I do not have that in me to give to you.
I do not have that time nor that energy. I got other stuff going on. And like that's the
Exactly.
thing when you're in high school, like sure, she's got this big, huge responsibility and she's fighting off the apocalypses and doing all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and they continue to and they continue to make the point, also one, because it's true, and two, because you know David's going off to be on his own show, the
Right.
fact that they can never be together because it
Yeah.
doesn't, because this is a relationship that doesn't work.
No.
It can't work. It's not supposed to work. And the
Right.
fact, and like, sure, and maybe that's, the tragedy of it all. Like, oh, we can't be together. Like,
Yeah.
sure, there's a little sexiness in that. But like at the end of the day, Jesus, that's just exhausting. Like, uh, there's so again, like why? Why?
I mean, I think half the reason it works, maybe all the reason it works is, well, I think there is that sort of like we have in our Western society that romantic notion of like tragic love and the Romeo and Juliet. And you're
Hmm.
like, okay, there's a reason it's one of Shakespeare's tragedies. Like, it's not meant to be held
Right.
up as like a great example of love. And then there's also the fact of like the phenomenal chemistry between Sarah and David. Like,
Sure.
that is basically, I think, what we're all being sucked into as
Hmm.
well. And so that is very much part of it. But like, you take that step back, or maybe those, as you get older, which is what we did, and you have other relationships in your life, and you grow and you mature and you got, wisdom from your experiences, you're like, let me take a step back and reassess this whole relationship and be like, it's not working. And I think the other part of it is too that Buffy is always going to be about her mission.
Right.
Certainly until, maybe things will change with once she's activated all the Slayers, and as she gets that settled, there'll be a moment where she can step back. But prior to that, the mission always has to come first. And Angel always also wants to be the hero. And he's not one who can take a step back. So that is another reason that relationship will, I think, never work.
Yeah, because he wants to be the man of the relationship, the quote unquote man, the hero, the
Correct.
protector, the provider, all of those things. And again, she doesn't need him to be that. What
Nope.
she needs him to be is her freaking boyfriend, is someone to love her and to create a safe space for her, who she can like talk to and have ideas with and share those things. But she's a freaking Slayer. She doesn't need him to kick ass for her. She can do that herself.
Yeah.
Like, and ugh, and the way that and again, like the way that he constantly like belittles her and
Hmm.
just makes and it's always making comments about you can't handle this, you can't handle this. Listen, bud, I can handle this just fine. You know why? Because I'm the chosen one. And if you weren't here, I would still have to handle this. So don't think that this big hero act is supposed to be this like thing of valor. It's really kind of annoying. And it shows me that you like it also makes me question how much do you love and trust me because you keep saying, well, you're just a kid, you're a child. Well, then why are you with me, you grown
Yes.
ass man? I don't
Yes.
understand.
Oh
If
my
you
God.
cannot
Yes,
respect
yes,
me as a
yes.
person, then why are you even with me? Go
Yeah. I mean,
somewhere with that.
right? I mean, in that point, the way he breaks up with her at the end of season three
Ugh.
epitomizes that. Like, he's such a jerk. Like, he's not wrong. And I love her conversation with Willow where she's like, this sucks and it hurts, but he's not wrong. I understand that. Like, we can't continue the way we have been. But he handles it so poorly and in the most like jerkish, manipulative way. And then then she still steps up to save his life when he's poisoned.
hmm
And
He's yeah. He's
but
so condescending too. Like
he,
he's so
oh my
condescending
God,
about how he breaks
yes,
up with her and does it like in the sewer
in
and
the
all this.
sewer.
Like, come on, dude. Like, go back to the apartment, like have a conversation, sit down and be, if you're so wise and mature and you're trying to have this like, well, we can't look, at least do it
Yeah.
right.
Well, I think that's the other side I've always felt about Angel in it as I've done my rewatches in later years. I see him as he is as emotionally and underdeveloped as like a teenager.
hmm
Even though it's so funny, having gone back to confirm like when we got, I think it came out in an Angel, we learn when he died. Like you get the dates of his like birth, death, so you know how old he was. I was shocked to learn he was like 26.
hmm
I had assumed based on his behavior and flashbacks that he was like 18, 19, 20, 21, maybe at the oldest. And the fact that he's 26 and he never basically got, he was basically a user and like didn't want to do anything
He was a
and
ne'er-do-well. He was definitely,
ne'er-do-well,
yeah.
exactly. And so he never was like forced to grow up, even though he had a very stringent father, and it came from a stringent Catholic background. And so that's the other part of it. Like he needs to grow up
hmm
so much. And I think the aside from losing his soul, which again, I mean, he didn't do on purpose, but like he also, like we said, never found out what did all this mean, like what could be the consequences from it. The most manipulative thing he does to her, and she doesn't even know it because he makes her forget. So we're going to do an Angel
Oh,
spoiler right now is
oh
I
yeah.
will remember you. And I remember watching that the first time and just like sobbing, probably every time I've watched it because it is so emotional and it's like
hmm
they play it so well. But when you again take a step back and think about it, it goes back to what you were saying earlier like he has to make the decisions. He has to go out and be the hero. And you're like, she is 100% competent and capable of going out there and stopping this demon and protecting you, but you can't handle that. You can't be just the human boyfriend. I mean, it's very Riley-esque
Yeah.
and then he makes the decision, oh, it's to protect her and she's going to die if I don't do this. And yet then he has them take the memory from her. So she has no idea. And guess what happens a year and a half later? She freaking dies. And is he there? No.
No.
Did he
Yeah.
step up once she died? No. I
No.
mean, I know logistics of reality in two different shows, but
Right.
like
But
emotionally.
and it's also weird too because in season so, we see them like it takes them, you know, season one is 12 episodes, and so like they really don't start kind of
Yeah,
connecting until like the back half of season one. And
right.
then and I think we've mentioned this before, that it's really only like a year that they're together. That's
Yeah,
not that long for this. And most of and and so it's the last half of the school year. They're together over the summer, and then but she's away because she goes away to LA
right.
to visit her dad, and then she comes back. And then they're like dating, the first half, and it's all fun and games, and then surprise happens. And then the rest of season two, he's evil. And so then when he comes back in season three, there's the whole they're not really together for like a chunk of season three, but then they are kind of together, but
But which,
we
uh,
never know like what that conversation is. We're like, when did they
well,
get
because
back together? And she says, because I just rewatched this, there's an episode where, um, oh, it's Fool for Love. It's no, Lover's Walk. Sorry, it's Lover's
yeah,
Walk. Um, uh, when Spike comes back and he's like, "Oh yeah, you all are friends. You're not friends. You'll never be friends." That
right.
whole thing. At the end of that episode, she breaks up with him. She says, I can't do this. You don't need me anymore. I don't, you don't need me to take care of you. Spike's right. We are in love with each other, but we can't be together. And she says, and he's like, but we can make it work. Come on, babe. Come on, babe. Like, come on. Like, babe, come on. It's gonna be awesome. We can still do this. And she's like, no, we don't. And then again, they go back into the cycle. I mean, it's like a dating antichrist. It's weird. Like they can't get rid of each other. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just gonna say. That scene, she like forcefully breaks up with them, and then all of a sudden they're like having these like various romantic moments throughout the rest of the season. And you're like, when did that happen? And I think I said this in our special episode with Paige and Ian, and I was like, even back then, when I was like fan of them as a couple, I remember during the actual live airing of season three being like, did I miss episodes? Like, when did they get back together? Like, when did
Right.
they have that conversation after she like put the kibosh very clearly at the end of Lover's Walk? And I'm like, it's still I watch it. I'm like, I feel like we're missing an
It just
episode.
it's something just fell through the cracks, and it's like, oh,
I
okay,
know.
well, no, this is gonna happen. And maybe that's part of the issue of how, like you've said before, like the issues of like long production periods when
Right.
you're having like
Right.
22 episodes, sometimes pacing and timing get thrown off
Yeah.
for things. But it's very like the relationship is so whiplashy and back and forth, and it's like,
Yeah.
ugh. And I get it. Like people, I understand that people are huge like Angel Buffy fans, and they're Spangle fans and love it. And good for you. And I don't want to take anything away from that.
Right.
I'm just not in that camp.
No. For sure. And I know we've been saying this all along, but maybe this is a good way to sort of summarize or make the point even more. So I found this really great quote in doing a little research on like manipulative relationships, and there was an article from Psychology Today that said, are you being manipulated in your relationship? Understanding gaslighting and other forms of destructive emotional abuse by Deborah J. Cohen, PhD. And so this is the quote, and I think it just applies like perfectly, maybe not perfectly, but applies very much to Angel. So the quote is a manipulative, excuse me, let me do this again. The quote is a manipulative person claims the frame, controls the timeline, and distorts the truth, all in an effort to manipulate things for their own gain and in an attempt to save face. Abusers also engage in an extraordinary level of denial, minimization, sidetracking, blaming, and seeing themselves as the victims. End quote. I just think that describes Angel so much.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he definitely c continues to control the narrative like the
Yeah.
entire time that they're together. Um, I mean, he controls when when the relationship starts, when it ends. Um, you know, so yeah, it's just, yeah. I mean, again, and I love Angel as a character. I think, as
Yeah.
a construct and everything. It's great. It's just not, in terms of it all, it's clearly not a great relationship for Buffy, and she doesn't,
No.
um, but as her first relationship, and this is being her like first big love, especially like first big love after this huge canon event that you've had of becoming a Slayer and doing
Right.
all this other stuff, like, of course it makes sense that you're drawn to, this person who's like
Yeah.
in the biz. It's a workplace romance,
Oh yeah.
And I think she even says like this is my last office place romance, like, um, which it should have been because it doesn't. I mean, maybe she only needs to have office place romances because it makes the most sense for her, but Angel is not the one. Angel is
No.
not the one. And I don't
No.
think, and so like, yeah, I don't think but I don't think it's her fault. Like, I don't,
Oh gosh,
you
no. I don't
know,
either. I don't
uh,
either. I mean, like I said, she was in so much tumult when she met him. I mean, she had, so first off, she had her parents divorced. Well, she had first her parents' marriage falling apart. It was, I think we get the implication that had been happening for a while. Then she gets called as a slayer. Then she burns down the school and her first watcher dies. And then as we learn later, whether you feel it's retconned or not, she gets put in a mental institution by her parents. Then her parents get divorced. Then they move to Sunnydale. She thinks she's getting this new fresh start after being kicked out of her old school.
mhm.
And she's got pressure from her mom. And then it turns out, hey, I cannot leave their Slayer duties behind. And not only that, I'm on like the literally the worst place for a
Um,
slayer. Like I will be
on the
doing
mouth
my
of hell.
job. Yeah, all the time. It will not only be nightly slaying, it will be a massive apocalypse every year. So like I get it. You're already, like I said earlier, you're going through so much as a teenager and then you factor all those in. So you can understand like how he might be a place um it's like it probably seemed perfect to her. Like he understood her world, he was a part of her world, and yet, it was giving her romance and it was letting her feel like a normal girl at the same time,
Mhm.
which she was very much fighting to maintain during those early years of the series.
Yeah. I mean, then the romanticism of it all. I think it's
Right.
so easy to go back and romanticize that relationship
Oh
and to
yeah.
be like, oh, yeah, it's so great. But it's not, I mean, it's
No.
so
I
not
think
great.
that's the thing that really like also upsets me is that it is held up as the epitome of her relationships.
Hmm.
Like, and it's something that she goes back to, and it's like down the road, hey, I'm gonna be here. I'm going nowhere. And it's like, oh, maybe when after grown up for a few years, I'm coming back to you, Angel. And you're like, why? You guys don't know each other.
Also, especially, spoiler alert for Angel, especially the last time she sees him when she goes to LA and they get into that whole fight with Faith. And he's like, you don't know me anymore. You don't get to come to my city and tell me what to do. You need to leave. Get the get the F out. Like you need to go somewhere, little girl. That's what he tells her.
Yeah.
He basically was like, I don't want to see you and you don't know me. So
Hmm.
you don't get to do this. So why is this all of a sudden this like huge again, we keep going back to the like romanticizing this,
Yeah.
especially for Angel when he's going through all like it doesn't, and here's the thing, it really doesn't make sense when he goes back to Sunnydale and Chosen to give us like to give the audience like that moment of thing.
Right.
But when you think of everything that just happened on Angel and when you think about
Yes.
like the stuff that he'd gone through with, again, we're spoiling Angel, like all the stuff that he went through with Cordelia and Connor and all of that stuff. And then you're going to come back and be like, hey, Buffy, how's it going?
Co-sign, co-sign. That is
It's
exactly,
weird.
oh my God, that is exactly how I felt when that whole thing happened. I was like, no, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not saying that I want like the show to blow off Buffy Angel fans, but it just like it was such story and character destruction
Mhm.
for both of them and both the shows. I was like,
Right.
no, no, no. It'd be
That's
one thing if like they wanted to have a moment of him back on the original series and he brought her that, but they also came to the place of like, hey, we've both grown up, we're moving on, like I'm there for you as like, in the good fight.
Yeah.
That would have been a great moment. I would have been like, great, you brought him back, but like they're both mature. We're moving on. Like we've had other relationships,
Right.
and see you around. But they could not let them go.
Mm-mm.
Let
And
them
then
go.
they double down on it in season
Yes.
5 of Angel. I was like, why are you doubling down on this? This doesn't make any sense.
Oh, I'm so with you.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It just, yeah, that whole thing with the immortal and all that. I was like, you guys, this is so dumb. Like, it's a fun episode. I do like that episode, but
Right.
it doesn't make sense for either Spike or Angel to be so like, oh my God, we got to go find Buffy because she's going to pick one of us. And it's like, she's not picking either one of you.
Yeah,
Leave her
exactly.
alone. And Andrew has to be the voice of reason to be like, y'all, slow your roll, kid. Like, you go somewhere. Sit down. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
So
anyway,
you can
I,
tell we have feelings
I feel
about
very passionately
Buffy
about
and
it.
Angel. Yeah, I mean, it breaks my heart that she went through that, and she kind of only took all the negative stuff from
Mhm.
it, and like it affected her emotionally going forward, not just in romantic relationships, but I think in how she saw slaying and the burden and the pain of slaying, which I'm not taking that away, but I think she kind of lost sight of, I think the positive things that came, like her friends,
Right.
like the who it helped her to become as like this really amazing person as well, not just a warrior and a hero.
Well, then also sort of realizing too that you do have some control over your
Yes.
relationships and you do have some autonomy about how a relationship develops
Right.
and that you get to like a relationship is a partnership and it's not
Yes.
this sort of like um this one-sided thing where this one person is making all the decisions for how this relationship goes. And you get to talk about those things and have conversations because there's lots of times where she's like, can we at least talk about this? And he's like, no, we can't.
Yeah.
He just shuts it down. And it's like, well, why not? You're in a relationship with her. Why can't you talk to her about this? Why can't you like sit down and have a rational conversation with your girlfriend about why you think that this is not going to work, as opposed to yelling at her, as opposed to like cutting her down, as opposed to saying, like, you don't understand. Look, you're just a kid. You don't understand. This again, if she's just a kid, why are you dating her?
Yeah. Well, I think some of that also comes from the fact that Angel is dealing with so much shame at who he was and what he's done, and having to live with like the soul and the monster and the soul fighting each other.
Hmm.
Um that I think that's also part of it. Like that's how he reacts, because it's more like I don't want to deal with all the emotional, you know, tornado that's happening inside of me, that
Right.
I'm not, willing to confront. And he puts her on such a pedestal. I think that's the other side of it. Like
Mm,
she's this redemption for him, and you're like, okay, 15-year-old girl when you first see her should not be your redemption. Um and that's a big burden to put on her. So I think that's also part of it. Like he doesn't want to like sully her.
hmm.
It's very like bodice ripper. Like, she's this like beautiful, you know,
Right. And I think
hero virgin.
and I think he sees like the strength in her
Yeah.
and all of that stuff and like her resilience and all of those things. And yes, I just don't know I don't know how much of that actually like gets played on the screen,
Hmm.
you know. Um, at least that I can remember. It might be time to go back and like watch again and but like the more stuff I remember more of the negative things that he does to her
Agreed.
than I can think of the good things that he does for her. Um, if I'm looking at the highlight reel that runs through my brain, there's a lot more bad than good.
Yeah, and funny, if I think about it, the like only one of the few times I can think about where they have like an honest conversation is when she has um the aspect of the demon and can read minds, and she
Mm,
goes to see him and she's like staring at him and he's like, you're not going to be able to read my mind, for some like BS vampire magic
Oh,
reason that I was
because
like,
right, because
really? The whole reflection but
reflecting the soul, and I
yeah,
can't.
I was like,
Yeah,
okay, whatever. But fine. But he's like, just ask me. And she does, and they actually talk about what's on her mind. And I was like, that's about like one of the few times.
yeah. I mean, and then he gives her the ring, you know,
Yeah.
which was so 90s. I mean, that ring, like
Well, I mean,
everyone had that ring in the night.
true, but at least he was like Irish, you
Yeah,
know.
that's true. I mean, it
At
tracked.
least it was part of his culture. And I
Yeah.
mean, he went back to like, bygone days. So
But yeah, I mean, so there was that. I think about that. So, um,
yeah, that and the cookie dough speech moment may be the like two most honest conversations
right.
they might have had.
So, Angel trots off to LA to go,
Yes.
be
Do,
a
do, do, do,
champion
do.
and a bad one at that. Sorry, y'all. Um, he's fine. He's good. He does some good things.
He
Um,
tries.
who tried? Um, and then we go on. I mean, then we get Riley.
Yes. And side note, real quick, because there's not much to talk about, but the whole Parker thing is it's so mean to do to her. Like as far as like the writing what the
Mhm.
show decided to do. The fact that like basically she has a second first time that repeats the first time.
Right.
She sleeps with a guy, like she tries
The
to get to
second
know
guy she
him,
sleeps with
and
also
then
turns out
he's
to be
a
a
total
jerk.
douche, and like basically again wakes up the next day and finds out the guy's a jerk, and all he wanted was from her was sex. And this time, like legitimately, it's not just like the supernatural version of that;
Right.
it's the pure human version. And I'm just like, why did you have to do that? That was so mean. Like they did not need to do that to her.
And yet they did.
I know. I know. Anyway,
Again,
I just had this like that all
yeah.
I just feel so bad for her. I want to be like, oh girl, you deserve better. It is not your fault. Like you put yourself out there. Good for you. And
Right.
you know,
He's just a jerk.
yeah. Which may tell you a little bit that like poor Buffy, I think in some ways at that point is still very like innocent in
Mhm.
her relationships, or like maybe sometimes at the point she's not always like the best at reading people. But at the same time, like I don't know, watching it is, I mean, now I know, but like thinking back to when I watched it when it originally aired, I wouldn't have necessarily like read Parker that way either.
No, because he doesn't play that way
No.
initially at all. And it's very, I mean, sure, it happens all the time, especially in
Hmm.
college. People
Yeah.
have those one night stands and all of that stuff. Um, but it also goes back to very much this idea that, especially when you're looking at like teen dramas on shows and
Hmm.
stuff like that, there's always this thing that like, oh, well, you know, sleeping with someone equals romance. Like,
Yes.
because you slept with someone, it has to be this romantic thing because, that's what television has taught us, is that the only way that two people can ever engage in a sexual situation is if they're romantically linked. And if that is how you choose to live your life, then that's great. And that is
Yeah.
wonderful. And that is absolutely one way to do it. And that's a way that should be, um, celebrated and seen. But there are other ways to engage in intimate relationships with people. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are in a romantic relationship or that this is your forever person. This could be your person for right now. This could be your person for 3 months. This could be like, I'll call you every couple of years, and
Yeah.
like,
Friends with benefits.
there's no like right or wrong way to do it. And they just put so much pressure on the idea that, like, oh, because she slept with him, then automatically her expectation is, well,
Right.
then we must be in a relationship now
Yeah.
because we slept together.
Right.
Which, like you said, makes her very naive. And I wonder if she is really like, would she have really been that naive, or is she,
I kind of feel like she has. I mean, she didn't really like, she had like, some dating experience that we gets implied from when she was in LA. But again, it was probably like mostly group hangs because she was like 14, 15, you know. And so, you know, she didn't really have an opportunity to have your typical boyfriend experience in high school. And so, like,
Yeah.
you know, well, you make mistakes, but not necessarily like the tragedy of her relationship with Angel. So I do think she still sees it as that way. And she doesn't think to like, she probably doesn't even think to ask him, like, are we dating? She just sort of makes that assumption when she's ready to sleep with him. Like, there's
Right.
no conversation about it. And if all Parker wanted to do was sleep with somebody and not have a like romantic relationship, also fine, but you got to be upfront about it.
Right. And that's the issue, is that Parker
Correct.
never was like, hey, FYI. And this is all a part, we talk about this now, from a modern lens, which is what we've been discussing these shows from, is
Right.
that like that's part of the consent of it all, right? Like that's
Yeah.
part of consent, is being like, not only is it like, hey, is it okay that we sleep together, but also this is my intention in us sleeping together. Like, I want to sleep with you, but I think I just want it to be a casual situation, and maybe just this one time. I'm not really sure yet. Because then that becomes a whole different thing, because then that could put you in a whole different mindset to be like,
Yeah.
oh, well, if that's what you want, I was thinking something else, so maybe we shouldn't do that. And then it gives people all of the information to make an informed decision whether or not they do that. He didn't tell her, and she made an assumption. So in that case, they were both wrong, and in that part of it,
Yes.
because she made an assumption and he was not clear about his intention. Um,
Right. Which I think he purposely was because he thinks that's
yeah,
what he had to do in order to get
right.
a girl to sleep with him.
Yeah,
And nobody was just going to be like, yeah, sure, I'm up for sleeping with you. Like, but it had to be like wined and dined, which
right,
I think also speaks to our larger problem of we're terrible about speaking about and understanding and teaching people about consent in
hmm,
relationships, particularly sexual romantic relationships, but I think across the board. And we're more aware of it. And I think the younger generations are more aware of it and talking about it. So, but I don't know how well it's being taught, particularly as we start to, as there was such a wave in the, US public education system to do abstinence only sex
right,
ed programs and not do a full spectrum that teaches not only about like your choices in having sex or not having sex and the spectrum within that, but just consent, how to obtain consent, what is consent, what does it mean, like how do you approach it, because teenagers are not going to know what to do. It's not instinctual.
right,
So I think Buffy never really had that, nobody to show her that or have those conversations with her.
right. Um, and I think television is a great way to introduce those ideas and those
Yeah.
concepts. And so, like, again, this was so many years ago, and so that wasn't sort of part of the mission statement of television
Right.
necessarily at the time. But I think, like, in a modern day, like that, what a great opportunity for conversation,
Yeah.
to be like, hey, this is what this could look like, um you know because then it allows guys to not have to be such douchebags about, like,
Mhm.
oh, I've got to, like, pretend like I'm interested in having this long-term relationship
Right.
in order to have sex with you, or to be intimate with you, or whatever. Um,
Or women to pretend that that's what they want.
right,
Like maybe
right.
you do just want to hook up. Good
Maybe
for
you
you.
do just want to hook up, and girls, get yours, get
Yes,
yours. Like, if that's
exactly.
what you want, then get it, and then leave him alone, because he ain't worth it anyway.
Right.
So I mean, just go, just do it. Um, and this whole double standard about, it's so dumb. I hate it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and of course that applies across any type of relationship. We're obviously right now talking about heterosexual male female relationships, but
Listen, boys, I get mines in. Listen, I tell people and it's really interesting. You tell people what you want, and the worst they can say is no.
yeah, exactly.
And you might
We're
be
so
surprised
afraid
who
of
says
no.
yes.
Exactly. We're like so afraid of no sometimes. And you're like, it's not that big of a deal. not if you're willing to know that that's potential outcome and you deal with it and you move on.
Right.
So
No, it's not
anyway,
a dirty word, but it is a complete sentence.
that's perfect. I wonder if that's on t-shirts.
It
So
should be.
yeah. So anyway, do feel like, that's even though Parker was on for such a short period, uh, he does make a big impact, I think, on Buffy's relationship development for sure.
Again, not her fault.
No.
Not her fault. It was just written that way. Um,
Yes.
she's not bad. It was just written that way.
Thank you so much for joining us for this first part of our two-part episode to discuss Buffy's romantic relationships. Hope you enjoyed the conversation, and please like, subscribe, give us 5 stars, rate us on your podcast app. That all helps get us more listeners, and we're so grateful for your support. If you aren't already following us on social media, check us out on Instagram and Facebook at A Buffy Podcast. And you can also email us if you got some longer ideas and thoughts to send us. You can email us at abuffypodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.
Bye.